I need to make love, don't move. The towering blacksmith widow pleads desperately to the quiet rancher standing frozen in her forge, her massive frame trembling with vulnerability as steam hisses around them. The giant woman has become the town's cruel whisper, too big, too strong, too frightening for any decent man to want. They assume she'll die alone, working her dead husband's forge until the bank seizes everything and casts her into the wilderness like a dangerous animal. But the soft-spoken rancher sees something else entirely, approaching her with unexpected tenderness that cracks open her guarded heart. What she doesn't know is that he's been paid handsomely to court her, part of a wealthy cattle baron's scheme to steal her land through marriage. As her desperate plea for love hangs in the smoky air between them, his conscience wars with his contract. Will he betray her trust for money, or risk everything to protect the woman he's grown to genuinely love? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The hammer fell against red-hot iron with bone-jarring force. Each strike sent sparks dancing across the dim forge like angry fireflies. Eliza Blackwood stood 6 feet 2 inches in her bare feet, towering over the horseshoe taking shape beneath her skilled hands. Her calloused fingers gripped the tongs with practiced ease as she shaped the metal to perfection. The bell above her shop door chimed. A weathered rancher shuffled inside, hat pulled low over his eyes. Most men barely glanced at her face before stating their business and hurrying away. This one was different. James Colt looked directly at her with steady gray eyes that held no fear. My mare threw a shoe about 2 miles out. His voice carried the soft drawl of someone who spoke more to horses than people. Heard you do fine work. Eliza nodded toward the hitching post outside. Through the window, she watched him gentle his limping horse with patient hands. He whispered to the animal in low tones that seemed to calm its nervous dancing. When he returned, his boots made soft sounds against her workshop floor. She's favoring the left front. Eliza wiped her hands on her leather apron. Should have her fixed within the hour. Most customers waited outside or wandered to the saloon. Jim settled onto a wooden crate near her anvil and watched her work. His presence felt different from the usual mix of fear and curiosity she inspired in townsfolk. When she caught him staring, he didn't look away with embarrassment or disgust. You've got steady hands, he observed as she fitted the new shoe. My father always said good smithing was more art than trade. Heat rose in Eliza's cheeks that had nothing to do with the forge fire. Compliments came as rarely as summer rain in the desert. She focused on her work, driving nails with precise strikes that would hold the shoe secure for months of hard riding. 3 days later, Jim returned with a broken bridle buckle. The damage looked suspiciously fresh, as if someone had deliberately weakened the leather with a knife. Eliza repaired it without comment, accepting his coins with hands that trembled slightly when their fingers brushed. Mighty grateful, Jim said, lingering by her anvil. Don't suppose you'd know anything about flowers. Eliza's breath caught. For the past week, she'd found small bouquets of wildflowers on her doorstep each morning. Prairie roses and Indian paintbrush tied with strips of rawhide. No notes, no signatures, just silent gifts that made her heart race with dangerous hope. Flowers don't much concern me. She turned back to her forge, cheeks burning. Got iron to work. Jim's boots scuffed against the floor. When she glanced over her shoulder, his expression held something that looked almost like longing. That evening, Aunt Clara knocked on Eliza's door carrying a pot of stew and her usual supply of town gossip. The older woman had been the closest thing to family since Samuel's death 2 years ago. She settled into the kitchen chair with a satisfied sigh. Saw that Colt fellow leaving your shop again? Clara's eyes twinkled with mischief. 3rd time this week, unless my counting's gone poor. Man's got equipment needs repair. Eliza ladled stew into wooden bowls, avoiding her friend's knowing look. Nothing more to it than business. Course not. Clara smiled into her spoon. Though I did notice fresh flowers in your front window. Pretty as church on Sunday. Before Eliza could respond, heavy footsteps echoed on her porch. Sheriff Hayes filled her doorway without invitation, his badge catching lamplight. Behind him stood 2 men from the town council, their faces grim with official business. Evening, ladies. Hayes touched his hat brim with mock courtesy. Got some legal matters to discuss, Mrs. Blackwood. He produced a rolled document tied with red ribbon. Eliza's hands shook as she unrolled the papers, scanning the formal language that might as well have been written in a foreign tongue. Bank's calling in your husband's debts, Hayes explained with cold satisfaction. Seems Samuel borrowed heavy against this property before he passed. You've got 30 days to settle accounts or face foreclosure proceedings. The numbers swam before Eliza's eyes. $800. She barely earned $50 in a good month. Even if she worked day and night, sold every tool and piece of furniture, the amount remained impossible. There's got to be some mistake. Her voice sounded small in the suddenly quiet kitchen. Samuel never mentioned debts this size. Dead men tell no tales, Hayes replied, but ledger books don't lie. Of course, town council's been discussing your situation. Might be we can work something out. His smile held no warmth. Clara's hand found Eliza's arm, offering what comfort she could. What kind of arrangement? Well now, that depends. Hayes rolled the papers back up with deliberate slowness. Widow woman alone ain't natural. Communities got responsibilities to see proper matches get made. Man with means might be willing to assume certain debts in exchange for certain considerations. The meaning hit her like a physical blow. They wanted to sell her off like livestock to whoever would pay Samuel's debts. Her size and strength, her skill with hammer and anvil, reduced to bargaining chips in some twisted business deal. I'll find the money myself. Eliza's voice gained strength from pure stubbornness. Don't need charity or arrangements. Hayes shrugged and headed for the door. 30 days, Mrs. Blackwood. Clock's ticking. After they left, Clara gripped Eliza's shoulders with surprising strength. Don't you dare give up, child. Samuel loved you fierce, and any man worth having will see what he saw. But as Eliza stared at the impossible debt notice, hope felt as distant as the stars. Tomorrow she would have to swallow her pride and do something desperate. She would have to ask Jim Colt for help, maybe even love, though the words would taste like ash in her mouth. Dawn broke gray and cold over Dusty Creek. Eliza had barely slept, the foreclosure papers haunting her dreams like ghosts. She worked her bellows with mechanical precision, stoking the forge fire until it roared hot enough to melt iron. The familiar rhythm usually calmed her nerves. Today it felt like marking time until disaster struck. The shop door chimed. Jim entered carrying another suspicious repair, this time a perfectly good bit that showed fresh file marks. His deception had become almost endearing in its transparency. Any other day she might have smiled at his amateur attempts to manufacture reasons for visiting. Morning. His greeting came soft as always, but something in his posture seemed different. Guilty. Got this bit giving me trouble. Eliza set down her hammer. The moment had arrived when pride would have to bow before necessity. Her throat felt dry as desert sand. Jim. She wiped her hands slowly, buying time she didn't have. Need to ask you something important. He stiffened like a man expecting a blow. The reaction struck her as odd. But desperation left no room for analysis. Those flowers you've been leaving. She forced the words out in a rush. They mean something, don't they? More than friendship. His face went pale beneath his tan. Eliza, because if they do, if you feel something real between us, then I need to make love work between us. Don't move away from what we might have. Her voice cracked with vulnerability she'd never shown another living soul. I'm losing everything. The bank, the town council, they're all circling like vultures. But if you and I could build something together, maybe... Stop. Jim's voice came out strangled. He backed toward the door as if she'd struck him. You don't understand what you're asking. The rejection hit harder than any physical blow. Eliza's hands dropped to her sides, massive fists unclenching in defeat. I understand plenty. Bitter laughter escaped her throat. Big as I am, strong as I am, no man wants damaged goods. Samuel was different, but lightning don't strike twice. That's not it. Jim ran his hands through his hair, the gesture desperate. Lord help me. That's not it at all. Something in his tone made her look closer. This wasn't simple rejection. This was a man at war with himself. Then what? The question hung between them like smoke. Jim's shoulders sagged as if carrying an invisible weight. When he spoke, each word seemed torn from his chest. The flowers weren't my idea. None of this was my idea. Ice formed in Eliza's stomach. What do you mean? Thaddeus Morrison hired me. Jim's confession came out in a rush of shame. $500 to court you, soften you up for his marriage proposal. He wants your land, Eliza. The whole valley. The workshop spun around her. She gripped the anvil for support, its solid iron the only real thing in a world suddenly made of lies. You've been paid to pretend. Her voice sounded hollow, echoing off the workshop walls. All those conversations, the way you looked at me. A job. Started that way. Jim stepped closer despite her obvious distress. But somewhere along the line, it stopped being pretend. I fell in love with you for real. Don't. She held up one massive hand to stop his approach. Don't make this worse with more lies. It's not a lie. Desperation crept into his voice. Morrison's got my ranch leveraged 6 ways from Sunday. I was facing foreclosure, same as you. $500 was the difference between keeping my father's legacy and losing everything. Eliza's mind raced, connecting pieces that formed a picture too ugly to accept. Morrison caused your debt troubles too. Bought up my loan from the bank. Jim nodded miserably. Same thing he's done to half the valley. Creates the problem, then offers the solution. Always at a price. The shop door chimed again. Sheriff Hayes entered without ceremony, his presence filling the small space with official menace. Behind him came Morrison himself, a well-dressed man in his 50s whose smile never reached his calculating eyes. Morning, Mrs. Blackwood. Morrison removed his hat with exaggerated courtesy. Trust young Colt here's been keeping you company during these trying times. Eliza's gaze flicked between the 3 men. Understanding flooding through her like ice water. All planned out, wasn't it? The debt, the foreclosure, the flowers, every piece arranged. Business is business. Morrison's smile widened. Nothing personal, you understand? Your property sits at the perfect junction for cattle drives heading north. With the right development, this whole valley could become quite prosperous. And I'm supposed to marry you for the privilege of making you rich. Marriage would legitimize the transfer. Morrison examined his manicured fingernails. Of course, if you prefer the auction block, town council's prepared to sell your hand to the highest bidder. For the good of the community, naturally. The words hit like hammer blows. An auction. They planned to sell her like livestock to whoever offered the most money. That's barbaric. Jim stepped forward, anger finally overriding his guilt. She's not property to be bought and sold. Ain't she, though? Hayes chuckled coldly. Unmarried woman with no family, no means of support. Community's got responsibilities. Can't have unmarriageable females cluttering up decent society. Morrison's hand settled on Jim's shoulder with false friendliness. Speaking of which, young Colt's done fine work softening the ground, so to speak. Earned every penny of that $500. Eliza's world narrowed to that single revelation. $500. The exact amount she'd dreamed of earning to start paying down Samuel's debts. Jim had made that much just by pretending to care about her. Get out. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. All of you, get out of my shop. Morrison tipped his hat. You've got 26 days left, Mrs. Blackwood. After that, the decision gets made for you. They filed out, leaving Jim standing alone by her anvil. His face showed genuine anguish, but Eliza's heart had turned to stone. Eliza, please listen. 26 days. She turned her back on him, focusing on the cold forge. That's how long I have to find another way. A real way. Let me help you fight him. You've helped enough. She picked up her hammer, its familiar weight a comfort against the chaos. Doors behind you, Mr. Colt. Use it. His footsteps retreated slowly, each one echoing like a nail in a coffin. When the door finally closed, Eliza allowed herself one moment of weakness. Then she began planning her war. The next morning brought news that spread through Dusty Creek like wildfire. Morrison had called a town meeting for Saturday evening. The subject, according to Hayes, was solving the widow problem once and for all. Eliza spent the day visiting every property owner in the valley. What she discovered chilled her blood. The Hendersons had lost their farm last month after mysterious cattle deaths. The Pattersons sold their general store after a string of accidents drove away customers. Each story followed the same pattern: unexplained troubles, mounting debts, then Morrison appearing with generous offers to buy them out. "He's been planning this for years," Clara whispered over afternoon tea, "creating problems, then swooping in like some kind of savior." Eliza's hands trembled as she held her cup. The scope of Morrison's manipulation stretched far beyond her small forge. He was systematically acquiring the entire valley, one ruined family at a time. Across town, Jim sat in Morrison's office like a man facing judgment. The cattle baron's smile held no warmth as he shuffled through legal documents. "Heard you had words with Mrs. Blackwood yesterday." Morrison's tone remained conversational. "Hope you didn't develop any foolish notions about backing out of our arrangement." "She knows about the money." Jim's voice came out hoarse. "Whole thing's blown up in our faces." "On the contrary." Morrison leaned back in his leather chair. "This accelerates our timeline perfectly. The widow's feeling betrayed and isolated. Makes her more susceptible to rescue by a wealthy husband." Jim's fists clenched in his lap. "You can't force her to marry you." "Can't I?" Morrison's laugh carried genuine amusement. "Saturday's town meeting will feature a vote on the widow auction. Every male property owner gets a say. Guess how they'll vote when they realize an unmarried woman with a failing business threatens property values." The horror of it settled over Jim like a lead blanket. Morrison had orchestrated not just Eliza's financial ruin, but her social isolation. The community would vote to sell her off rather than support her independence. "Course, if you're having second thoughts about our deal, I can always call in your ranch loan immediately." Morrison's fingers drummed against his desk. "Your father's land would make a fine addition to my cattle empire." Jim felt the trap closing around him. Morrison held every card, controlled every option. Fighting back seemed impossible when the man owned half the town and influenced the rest through fear. That evening, Aunt Clara arrived at Eliza's door carrying more than her usual gossip. She set a cloth bundle on the kitchen table with reverent care. "Found these in Samuel's old trunk." Clara unwrapped several papers with Samuel's careful handwriting. "Looks like he was keeping records of something important." Eliza studied the documents by lamplight. Samuel had documented strange occurrences around the valley over the past 3 years. Cattle deaths, well contamination, mysterious fires. Each incident preceded a property sale to Morrison. He suspected something. Eliza's finger traced her dead husband's words. "Look at this entry from last winter." Samuel had written about Morrison's visit to their forge. The cattle baron had offered to buy their land for twice its value. When Samuel refused, Morrison had made veiled threats about accidents that could befall stubborn property owners. "There's more." Clara produced another bundle from her bag. "Letters Samuel wrote but never sent." Read the last one. Eliza's hands shook as she unfolded the final letter. Samuel had addressed it to the territorial marshal, detailing his suspicions about Morrison's methods. He'd planned to mail it the day he died. He was going to expose Morrison. Eliza's voice barely rose above a whisper. "The fever that killed him came on so sudden. What if—" She couldn't finish the thought, but Clara's grim nod confirmed they shared the same horrible suspicion. Samuel's death might not have been natural. Morrison eliminated threats to his empire, and Samuel had posed the biggest threat of all. Saturday evening arrived with unseasonable cold. The town hall filled beyond capacity as every male property owner crowded inside. Women were barred from attending, relegated to waiting anxiously at home. Morrison stood at the front like a preacher addressing his flock. His speech painted Eliza as a burden on the community, a dangerous example of what happened when women operated without male guidance. "The Blackwood situation threatens our town's moral fabric." Morrison's voice carried to the back rows. An unmarried woman running a business, handling tools meant for men, defying natural order. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Hayes nodded approvingly from his seat in the front row. I propose we solve this problem through public auction. Morrison's smile widened as he delivered his trap's final spring. Any man willing to assume Mrs. Blackwood's debts and provide proper guidance can bid for her hand. Proceeds will benefit the community fund. The vote was swift and decisive. 37 men voted in favor, only 3 against. The auction would take place the following Saturday in the town square. Outside, Jim stumbled through the darkness toward his ranch. Morrison's victory felt complete, crushing. In 1 week, Eliza would be sold to the highest bidder like a prize heifer. The thought made his stomach revolt. At her forge, Eliza worked through the night by firelight. Each hammer blow against the anvil echoed like a gunshot through the quiet town. She was forging more than horseshoes in the red-hot flames. She was forging her resolve. Clara found her there at dawn, still working despite exhaustion. Meeting went as expected. Clara's words held no surprise. They voted for the auction. Eliza set down her hammer and wiped soot from her hands. Her decision crystallized like cooling metal. Then I reckon it's time to fight back properly. She reached for Samuel's hidden letters with steady hands. Morrison's been playing a long game, but he made one mistake. What's that? He killed the wrong man's husband. Eliza's eyes burned with more than forge fire. Samuel left me everything I need to bring Morrison down. Just took me time to find it. The war for Dusty Creek was about to begin in earnest. Samuel's secret revealed itself in the cellar beneath their home. Eliza had avoided the cramped space since his death, unable to face the memories stored in shadows. Now she descended the wooden steps with Clara's lantern casting dancing light on stone walls. Behind stacked preserving jars, Samuel had hidden a metal strongbox. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, lay documents that would change everything. Land surveys, mineral assessments, and a letter from the territorial mining office that made Eliza's heart race. Gold. Clara's whisper echoed off the cellar walls. Samuel found gold on your property. The assay report confirmed rich deposits running beneath Eliza's land and 3 adjacent properties. Samuel had filed the claim secretly, planning to develop the mine slowly to avoid attracting unwanted attention. His caution had saved Eliza from Morrison's immediate greed, but cost Samuel his life. More disturbing were the medical notes tucked beneath the mining papers. Samuel had documented his symptoms during his final weeks: stomach cramps, hair loss, metallic taste in his mouth. The progression matched arsenic poisoning perfectly. Morrison killed him. Eliza's voice carried deadly certainty. Samuel got too close to exposing the land grab. Morrison couldn't risk him filing complaints with territorial authorities. Clara examined a small vial filled with white powder. Found this in Samuel's coat pocket after he died. Thought it was medicine. Eliza held the vial up to the lantern light. The crystalline substance looked innocent enough, but she recognized it from her blacksmithing work. Arsenic was used to strengthen certain metal alloys. In larger doses, it became a killer. They climbed back to the kitchen where Clara spread the evidence across the wooden table. Samuel's documentation painted a clear picture of systematic murder disguised as natural death. Morrison's been poisoning property owners who won't sell. Eliza traced the timeline with her finger. Henderson's cattle died after drinking from a contaminated stream. Patterson got sick from tainted flour. Samuel ate poisoned food at the church social. The pattern emerged like a terrible map of Morrison's ambition. Each death or illness preceded a generous offer to buy distressed property. The community praised Morrison's charitable nature while he systematically murdered his way to an empire. Meanwhile, Jim sat in the Dusty Creek jail, arrested for disturbing the peace after confronting Morrison publicly. Deputy Martinez, a decent man trapped in an indecent situation, brought him water and stale bread. Heard about the auction? Martinez kept his voice low. Don't sit right with me selling a woman like livestock. Then help me stop it. Jim gripped the cell bars until his knuckles turned white. Morrison's planning more than marriage. He's been killing people, Martinez. Good people who got in his way. The deputy's face showed he'd suspected the same thing. Too many convenient deaths, too many accidents that benefited one man. But suspicion without proof meant nothing against Morrison's wealth and influence. What kind of proof you talking about? The kind that'll get us both killed if we're not careful. Jim lowered his voice further. Samuel Blackwood was documenting Morrison's crimes before he died. If Eliza found those papers... Martinez glanced toward the sheriff's office where Hayes snored in his chair. The sheriff's loyalty belonged entirely to Morrison's payroll. Any evidence brought to Hayes would disappear faster than morning dew. Territorial marshals due through town next month. Martinez spoke barely above a whisper. Federal authority trumps local corruption. Question is whether Mrs. Blackwood can survive that long. That night, Eliza made her choice. She could flee with the evidence and live safely elsewhere, or stay and fight Morrison's empire at the cost of everything, including her life. Samuel's hidden gold gave her financial power to match Morrison's, but using it meant revealing the mine's location. Clara found her sitting by the cold forge, staring at the strongbox contents. Running would be smart. Clara settled beside her friend with a heavy sigh. Morrison's killed for less than what you've discovered. Samuel didn't run. Eliza's finger traced her wedding ring, worn thin from 2 years of mourning. He stayed and fought, even knowing the danger. Can't do less than he did. Then we fight smart. Clara's voice carried grim determination. Morrison's got money and influence, but we've got truth and angry widows. This town's full of women who've lost husbands to convenient accidents. The next morning brought unexpected allies. Martha Henderson arrived at the forge carrying her own bundle of evidence. Her husband's medical records showed symptoms identical to Samuel's final illness. Doc Miller wouldn't listen when I said Tom was poisoned. Martha's hands shook with suppressed rage. Said grief was making me imagine things. But I saved everything, every symptom, every timeline. By afternoon, 6 more women had joined them. Each carried stories of husbands who died suddenly after refusing Morrison's offers. The pattern was undeniable when viewed together. Morrison had murdered his way across the valley for 3 years. Sarah Patterson brought the most damning evidence. Her late husband had kept detailed business records, including purchases from Morrison's ranch supplies. The same arsenic used for cattle dip could easily poison a man's food. He bought enough poison to kill half the county. Sarah's voice carried bitter satisfaction. Claimed it was for treating sick livestock, but his cattle were the healthiest in the valley. Eliza studied the purchase receipts with growing excitement. Morrison's own records would convict him if presented to federal authorities. The territorial marshal would have to investigate when faced with such overwhelming evidence. But first, they had to survive until his arrival. Morrison's auction was set for Saturday. If Eliza was sold and married, her legal status would change. A married woman's property belonged to her husband. Even proven gold claims could be transferred through forced marriage. He's not just buying a wife. Eliza's realization chilled the room. He's buying legal ownership of the richest gold mine in Arizona territory. Marriage makes the transfer look legitimate. The stakes had multiplied beyond anyone's imagination. Morrison wasn't just building a cattle empire. He was positioning himself to control the territory's mineral wealth through systematic murder and forced marriage. Time was running out. The auction was 3 days away, and Morrison held every official position in town. Sheriff Hayes would ensure no interference. The town council would validate any marriage performed. Even the preacher answered to Morrison's donations. Eliza made her final decision as sunset painted the desert sky crimson. She would use Samuel's gold to buy her freedom, then use the evidence to destroy Morrison's empire. The plan was dangerous, possibly fatal, but surrender meant dishonoring every person Morrison had murdered. The real war was about to begin. Saturday morning arrived with unseasonable heat that made the desert shimmer like a mirage. The town square buzzed with activity as men erected a makeshift platform for the widow auction. Women watched from doorways and windows, forbidden from participating but unable to look away. Eliza stood in her forge, wearing her finest black dress and Samuel's wedding ring, The strong box sat open on her anvil, gold nuggets gleaming in the morning light. She'd made her choice. Today Morrison's empire would crumble or she would die trying to bring it down. Clara burst through the door carrying urgent news. Martinez helped Jim escape during the night. They're riding hard toward the territorial capital to fetch the marshal. Too late. Eliza hefted a leather satchel filled with evidence. Auction starts in 2 hours. Whatever happens, Morrison can't be allowed to win. The church bell tolled 9 times as the crowd gathered. Morrison stood on the platform like a king surveying his domain. Sheriff Hayes called for order while reading the legal proclamation that reduced Eliza to property for sale. "Let's get this unpleasant business finished," Hayes's voice carried across the square. "Mrs. Eliza Blackwood, step forward for inspection." A path opened through the crowd like the parting of hostile waters. Eliza walked with her head high, refusing to show the fear clawing at her insides. The platform creaked under her weight as she took her designated position. "Opening bid is $500. Hayes consulted his papers with mock officiousness. "Bidder assumes all debts and obligations associated with the property." Morrison raised his hand with theatrical confidence. "500. A ripple of nervous laughter ran through the crowd. Everyone knew Morrison would win. The auction was mere theater to legitimize his acquisition of Eliza and her land. "Do I hear 600? Hayes scanned the crowd without enthusiasm. Silence stretched like a bowstring pulled to breaking. Then a voice rang out from the back of the square. $1,000. Heads turned toward the unexpected bidder. Old Pete Garrison, owner of the failing general store, stepped forward with shaking hands. His wife Sarah stood behind him, her face grim with determination. Morrison's confident smile flickered. 1,100. 1,200. Pete's voice gained strength. More hands rose throughout the crowd. Martha Henderson bid 1,300. Tom Patterson's brother called out 1,500. The price climbed as Morrison's victims struck back through the only means available. Morrison's face darkened with rage as he realized the trap closing around him. These weren't legitimate bids. The widows had organized their own rebellion using the auction itself as a weapon. $2,000. Morrison's voice cut through the rising chaos. Cash on the barrel. The crowd fell silent. $2,000 exceeded most men's annual income. Even combined, the small property owners couldn't match Morrison's resources. Eliza stepped forward before Hayes could declare Morrison the winner. "I invoke my right to reject any bid I find unacceptable." Her voice carried across the square like a blacksmith's hammer on iron. "Including Morrison's." Hayes sputtered in confusion. "Women don't got rights in these proceedings." "This woman does." Eliza reached into her satchel and produced a handful of gold nuggets that caught sunlight like captured fire. "I hereby pay off all debts associated with my property. This auction is terminated." Gasps rippled through the crowd as people stared at the fortune glittering in Eliza's palms. More gold than most had seen in their lifetimes, enough to pay every debt in town twice over. Morrison lunged forward, his composure finally cracking. "That gold was mined illegally on contested land. I'll have you arrested for theft." "From my own property?" Eliza's laugh held no humor. "Property Samuel legally claimed and registered with territorial authorities. Every nugget came from ground we own free and clear." She produced the mining claim documents, their official seals visible to the entire crowd. Morrison's face went white as he realized the implications. Samuel had outsmarted him from beyond the grave. "Furthermore," Eliza continued, her voice rising with righteous anger, "I accuse Thaddeus Morrison of murdering my husband through arsenic poisoning." The crowd erupted in shocked voices. Morrison stepped backward as if physically struck. "That's insane." Morrison's protest sounded hollow. "Samuel died of natural fever. Everyone knows that." Martha Henderson pushed through the crowd carrying a wooden box. "Then explain these medical records documenting arsenic poisoning symptoms in 6 different men, all who died after refusing your land offers." Sarah Patterson joined her, waving purchase receipts. "Explain buying enough arsenic to kill an army while claiming it was for cattle treatment." More women emerged from the crowd carrying evidence. Each accusation built upon the last until Morrison stood surrounded by proof of his crimes. Sheriff Hayes moved to protect his employer, hand resting on his gun. That's enough wild accusations from hysterical women. Hysterical women with federal evidence of systematic murder. Eliza's voice carried deadly certainty. Evidence that's already been copied and sent to territorial authorities. The lie came easily, but it served its purpose. Morrison's remaining allies began backing away as they realized the scope of his crimes. No amount of money was worth hanging alongside a mass murderer. Thunder echoed across the desert as a dozen riders approached at full gallop. Jim led the group, riding beside a stern-faced man wearing a territorial marshal's badge. Behind them came federal deputies armed with arrest warrants. Morrison made a desperate break for his horse, but the crowd had turned against him. Strong hands seized his arms and held him until the marshal arrived. "Thaddeus Morrison, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and suspicion of murder." The marshal's voice cut through the chaos with federal authority. "Evidence suggests you've been systematically poisoning property owners to steal their land." Hayes drew his gun in a final act of loyalty, but found himself facing 24 angry townspeople. His weapon clattered to the platform as he raised his hands in surrender. Morrison's empire collapsed in the space of minutes. His corrupt officials fled or switched sides. His purchased loyalty evaporated like morning mist. The man who'd terrorized an entire valley now stood in chains before the people he'd wronged. Eliza stepped down from the platform, a free woman, her gold securing not just her independence but justice for every person Morrison had murdered. The widow auction had become Morrison's trial, and the verdict was unanimous. 3 months later, Dusty Creek bore little resemblance to the frightened town Morrison had terrorized. New businesses lined the main street, funded by Eliza's gold mine profits shared generously with Morrison's victims. The widow who'd once been scorned now stood as the community's most respected citizen. Eliza hammered a horseshoe into perfect shape while Jim watched from his usual spot near the anvil. Their friendship had rebuilt slowly, trust returning like water seeping back into drought-cracked earth. She'd forgiven his deception after learning Morrison had threatened to destroy his father's ranch. Desperation drove good people to terrible choices, but it didn't make them terrible people. She was ready. She plunged the hot iron into water, steam rising like incense. "Your mare should run smooth for months." Jim examined her work with the eye of a man who understood quality craftsmanship. "You always did the finest smithing in 3 counties. The compliment warmed her more than the forge fire. During Morrison's reign of terror, people had hurried through transactions without acknowledging her skill. Now customers lingered to chat, seeking her advice on everything from metalwork to business investments. Clara entered carrying wedding invitations written in her careful script. The entire town had been invited to witness Eliza and Jim's marriage, a celebration that would mark their community's rebirth. "Preacher Murphy wants to hold the ceremony in the church." Clara's eyes sparkled with mischief. "But I told him you two preferred the town square. Same spot where Morrison's empire fell." Eliza smiled at the symbolism. The platform built for her humiliation would become the altar for her joy. She'd transformed from auction property to the town's most powerful citizen through courage, intelligence, and Samuel's hidden legacy. The territorial investigation had uncovered Morrison's crimes in horrifying detail. 7 men poisoned with arsenic. Dozens of families driven from their homes through manufactured crises. A network of corruption reaching from local officials to territorial banks. Morrison himself sat in the territorial prison awaiting trial for multiple murders. His confession, coerced through overwhelming evidence, had freed many innocent people he'd framed for various crimes. Sheriff Hayes joined him in federal custody, his badge stripped away like a snake shedding skin. The gold mine operated under Eliza's careful management, employing half the men in town at wages that supported their families with dignity. She'd retained ownership while sharing profits through a cooperative system that made everyone stakeholders in Dusty Creek's prosperity. Jim's ranch had expanded to include several properties Morrison's victims couldn't maintain alone. The cooperative model extended to cattle raising, with smaller ranchers pooling resources under Jim's gentle leadership. His way with horses translated perfectly to managing people through kindness rather than fear. Saturday morning arrived bright and clear, the desert air carrying hints of wildflowers and new grass. The town square filled with families dressed in their finest clothes. A platform decorated with ribbons and prairie roses awaited the bride and groom. Eliza wore a dress of deep blue silk that Clara had sewn with loving care. No more widow's weeds of morning black. The color brought out her eyes and complemented her impressive height without trying to hide her natural presence. She walked through the crowd without fear of whispers or cruel stares. Children waved from their parents' shoulders. Women smiled with genuine warmth. Men tipped their hats with respect earned through her actions, not inherited through marriage. Jim waited beside Preacher Murphy, wearing his father's best suit altered to fit his smaller frame. When Eliza reached the platform, he offered his arm like a gentleman escorting a lady, not a man claiming property. Dearly beloved, we gather today to witness the union of two souls who found strength in each other. Murphy's voice carried across the square. Eliza and James have chosen to build their future on love, respect, and shared purpose. The ceremony proceeded with simple dignity. No lengthy sermons about wifely obedience or male authority. Murphy had learned that this couple operated as equals, each bringing different strengths to their partnership. When time came for vows, Jim spoke first. Eliza, you showed me that real strength comes from facing truth, not running from it. I promise to stand with you in whatever comes, not behind you or ahead of you, but beside you. Eliza's response brought tears to many eyes. Jim, you saw me as a woman worth loving when others saw only a problem to solve. I need to make love work between us, and I won't move from your side through whatever life brings. The phrase that had once expressed desperate vulnerability now became a declaration of committed partnership. She'd reclaimed those words, transforming them from plea to promise. Murphy pronounced them husband and wife as the crowd erupted in cheers. Jim kissed his bride gently, sealing their union with tenderness rather than passion. Their love had grown from friendship through trials, building foundations that could weather any storm. The celebration continued through the evening with music, dancing, and feasting funded by Eliza's generosity. Former enemies mingled as neighbors. Children played games that crossed old social boundaries. The community that Morrison had nearly destroyed was reborn stronger than before. As night fell, Eliza and Jim stood on the platform where her auction had begun and Morrison's empire had ended. Stars blazed overhead in the clear desert sky. Regret anything about today? Jim's arm encircled her waist, only that Samuel couldn't see it. She leaned against his solid warmth. He'd be proud of what we built from the ashes. Think he knows? I think he left me everything I needed to find my way here. She turned in his arms, her height allowing her to look directly into his eyes. Including the wisdom to recognize a good man when I found one. They walked home together through streets lit by lamplight and hope. Two broken people who'd discovered they were exactly enough when standing together. The giant black widow had become simply Eliza Colt, beloved wife, successful businesswoman, and the heart of a community reborn through love, conquering fear. In Dusty Creek, they would always remember the day justice triumphed and true love proved stronger than gold.